All right, we have to talk about the Joker. I know it's a little late. It's about a week late. I apologize, but I finally got to see the Joker last night. And I'm going to tell you right now, this is how you do an origin story. Now, it's not exactly faithful to the source material. Parts of it are, for example, him being a failed stand-up comic, all that good stuff. But I'm going to tell you right now, I can just say right up front, DC, this was outstanding. And if you don't use this in the main DCEU, which apparently they're not, apparently this other Joker from Suicide Squad is the official Joker, you guys are insane. So obvious spoiler warning if you didn't get it from the title of this video and the thumbnail. This will be a spoiler review, so by all means, if you have not seen it, do not let this be ruined. Go see the movie. Just go see it. There's not very many movies where I'll definitively say you got to go see the movie. Go see Joker. This is how you do an origin story. This is how you do a film in general. It doesn't even have to be a comic book story. As a matter of fact, this is not your standard action-driven comic book movie. This is just a movie. It's a one-off. Obviously, it's not in the DCEU. This is a dark, gritty, disturbing movie, but it's based off what he should be. This is what me and others I would expect as a comic book fan would expect to see as the Joker origin story. Now, the origin story is not that definitive, though. That's the great thing about this. Actually, let me switch over to this so it's not just me talking the whole time. We'll play this in the background here as far as the trailers go. You know, and this movie had a lot of controversy. I want to talk about that really quickly too. It's been surrounded by controversy from, the mainstream media, big media, whatever you want to call it. And I usually don't get into political issues here on the channel, but you almost have to talk about a couple things for this type of movie. It's the same argument, it's violent, and yes, it's violent, but not nearly as violent as many other films you've already seen and nobody said a word about. There was one pretty brutal death scene, I would say. The other ones were, there's a couple, but it wasn't as brutal as other films by any means. There was some political issues, I think, they kind of touched on, like gun control, for example. Arthur got a gun illegally, one way or the other. Again, it's questionable what actually happened, and we'll get into that in a second about what actually happened in this movie. But it wasn't the point. The point was that he felt no remorse after he did use it to protect himself. He didn't feel bad about what he had done, which goes into the mental health issues. That's another thing that's brought up, obviously, before. So mental health and medication and all that stuff is a real conversation that needs to be had, regardless of your political stance. So I just want to get that out of the way. There are some of these things that I think were touched upon, but this was not an overtly political movie. I mean, I saw some critic reviews that said it was propaganda and all this stuff, and that's just ridiculous when you see the movie. But it kind of goes back to the same argument we've heard for decades now, like how video games inspire violence. If someone sees a violent movie or a violent video game and does something violent, that is definitely the exception, not the rule. That person already had deeper issues, way bigger, way deeper than a video game or a violent movie or whatever. I mean, that argument is actually just ridiculous. So, I think that was part of the argument as well before this movie was even released. Movies have been out that are way more violent, so the argument that this art somehow inspires violence is old, and frankly, it's bullshit. I mean, have you seen Saw? Have you seen Rambo? Have you seen Natural Born Killers? Maybe Taxi Driver from like 1975 or 76. Those are much worse as far as violence goes. So that argument is old and tired. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on all that stuff really quickly, but let's get into the movie because, I mean, and going back to that point for just a second, I mean, we can watch the Joker's nemesis, Batman, go through a tragedy of his own by losing his parents, and then he goes through a lot of mental issues. I mean, he dresses like a damn bat, for Christ's sake. He dresses like a bat, and he runs around the city as a vigilante, beating the shit out of people, and some deservingly so. I'm not saying that's not the case. He is a hero in that aspect, but he's also an anti-hero in some ways, which is why he's called a vigilante in the first place. So somehow watching Batman do these things is okay and applauded, but when you see the Joker, his arch nemesis, going through the same thing where he has a personal tragedy, or I should say a string of personal tragedies on top of an actual mental illness, then he just kind of uses that instead of doing good. He uses that and goes the other direction. For some reason, that's not okay. So I think it's important to at least recognize that Batman and the Joker are the same story. It's just that the Joker chose to not use his personal tragedy to do good in the world, and that's the idea with Batman and the Joker in the first place. They're the same person in the sense of using tragedy and just going down different paths with it. So it's how they reacted to it. So anyway, the things I really enjoyed here in the movie and what we explored in this movie is we see the tragedy, like I mentioned before, of Arthur Fleck. Arthur is already off his rocker when we see the movie open. He's seeing a shrink, and the city cuts his funding, so he can't get his medication. He doesn't even know where to go to get his medication, so he simply goes off his medication. And this kind of correlates with how the movie slowly builds to him becoming this thing, and that's what's really great about it. He has a mental condition, which I thought was great, where he laughs uncontrollably, even in situations where it doesn't call for laughter. And of course, people around him don't react very well to that. They don't understand it. And he actually has these little cards that he hands out that are laminated, so when he's in the middle of a laughing attack, because he literally can't stop and it's hard for him to breathe, he passes out this little card that says, I have a mental condition that makes me laugh uncontrollably, even in this situation that doesn't call for laughter. And he actually hands those out to people. So you definitely feel bad for the guy. You feel bad for Arthur in this movie because you see his life and just these string of events that inevitably leads him to become this horrible person on top of an actual mental illness. So you empathize with him, but you don't feel sorry for him once he starts becoming the Joker and doing things where he enjoys killing people and he enjoys violence and all that stuff. So you definitely feel for him for a while, and that's the point. You're getting a real human story here of why he became what we know as the Joker. He was a failed stand-up comic, obviously. That is from the source material as far as comic books goes. He loses his job as a working clown where he does all these little gigs for a little clown company called Ha Ha. So he ends up losing this job as the clown because essentially he was out in front of a building. He was spinning a sign for a store that he was hired for. Some kids took his sign. He chased them. They beat the shit out of him in an alley. And his buddy supposedly gave him a gun to protect himself because he got the shit kicked out of him. And he's not supposed to have that gun. It was illegal. And also because he has mental issues, obviously. So that was the implication there anyway. But the question is did he really get that way or not? And I'll get into that in a second, because the great thing about this story is that Arthur is an unreliable narrator. It's really blurs the lines on what's real and what's not in this movie. And in fact, there are theories out there already, and I thought about it myself, that this whole entire movie just took place inside of his head. But anyway, to continue this kind of downward spiral, he finds out his mother's lied to him. He thinks he's Bruce Wayne's half-brother for a while, that his mother and Thomas Wayne had some kind of secret love affair or relationship, and it turns out she was just delusional, and he was actually adopted, and he was abused as a child by her and her boyfriend, and she was committed to Arkham Asylum as well. So he actually, finds out and then thinks for a while that, Thomas Wayne's lying to him and not sending this money to help them out. And he goes and checks himself and finds his mother's records and realizes he's just nobody. He's literally just a kid who was adopted with no backstory whatsoever. So he loses his identity completely. What little bit of identity he has, he completely loses with all that. He ends up killing his mother, of course. And the only thing left to hold on to is this clown identity, because when he first used that gun the first time, he was actually protecting himself, at least at first. Now, he did chase down the third guy and finish him off, so it wasn't completely self-defense, but it was at first. But then that apparently motivated this city to start rioting and stuff based off this sentiment against the rich. The question is, was it really even that? Were all these people wearing clown masks and stuff? Were they even actually wearing clown masks? Because we heard on the news in the beginning of the movie, the unrest around the city was about the garbage piling up and about these, huge rats, this huge rat problem. So again, it goes back to the unreliable narrator thing. Arthur is hearing and seeing things that he wants to see and hear. He makes this narrative his own in his own head. So it's really cool how it's not definitive and you're not really even sure what actually happened. Now, there's a couple things that obviously didn't happen, and they kind of pulled the curtain back. For example, he had a girlfriend for a while, which was really odd and out of place. You didn't feel like this girl would like him. He's very odd around people. People think he's weird. And then you find out that every time you saw them together, she was not actually even there. Like, for example, she was there in the hospital room with his mother. He went on a date with her, and they actually, you know, made out and all this stuff. And it turns out that that actually never happened. He walks into her room one night, and she comes out, and she screams. She's like, wait a minute, you're the guy from down the hall. So you're like, oh, shit, she didn't even know the guy. She just kind of knew him from bumping into him in the elevator. So you find out at that point that some of these things you see may not have even actually happened. They're all basically in his imagination. Another example of that is when he's in the crowd, and he's a big fan of Robert De Niro's character, who's this late-night talk show host, and he sees him as this father figure. He has this fantasy of him being in the crowd and him picking him out and calling him down there and kind of recognizing him and being this father figure. And it turns out he was never even in the crowd. He was just a fan because he just kind of zoned into this, you know, reality of his in his head while he's watching this show every night with his mother. So it's really cool how they did this. They didn't, because there were little hints, but not any camera things to make you understand that this was a delusion, something going on inside his head. So it makes you question the whole damn movie. And also, once he gets to the point where he doesn't feel bad about killing people and stuff, he starts to go after the people that's wronged him. He remembers everybody that's made fun of him in any way, but he also lets people live that have not, that were nice to him, like the little clown guy. I forgot his name, but he lets him go after killing his buddy, the one that, you know, supposedly gave him the gun. But that's when he really turns and accepts this true identity of his in his own little world of being the Joker, and that's how he has Robert De Niro introduce him when he goes on this late night show at the end of the movie. So it's really good. It's really cool that it's not definitive. You don't really know exactly what happened, so it's a great origin story, although it might not be exactly correct because, again, we're seeing what's going on within his head. It was based off his childhood trauma that he never knew anything about. So, you know, at first you're thinking maybe, you know, his mother's a little off the rocker, so he's a little off the rocker. It's kind of hereditary, but he's adopted. I mean, he's literally nobody in his own head, and so he accepts this clown Joker persona, and that's the origin story. And this also explains a lot of things I thought were odd while watching the movie about, like, Thomas Wayne seemed to be an asshole. He was a pretty much a dick, you know, running for mayor, I believe, to try to solve this problem, and he came off as an asshole. Did he say the things he said on TV while running for mayor that doesn't seem like something a politician would say to people because he needs their support? Did he say some of the things in the bathroom scene to Arthur? Did we hear that correctly? You know, that's what's great about it. You don't really know. And it's one of the few times I'll say that you don't want definitive answers. That's what's really cool about it. So this was a pretty damn genius movie. But they do take a step to also show you the original Batman thing, because the Joker, in his world, in his story, he's the one that created Batman. So they do take the time to show you that since he inspired this rogue clown movement of people around the city and these riots, etc., that the killer of Martha and Bruce Wayne, all the way down to ripping the pearl necklace off her neck, was inspired by the Joker and was, a matter of fact, wearing one of these Joker clown masks, if that was even a real thing. So at least in his own head, in his own madness, he creates the chaos that inspired the guy that kills Bruce's parents, for him to later on go kind of crazy himself, fall down a dark tunnel somewhere, run into a bunch of bats, and start dressing up like a damn bat figure. So that's what's always been great about the Batman Joker story, is that they're really the same person. They just chose different paths on how they reacted to personal tragedy. So anyway, guys, that's about all I can say about the Joker. I mean, this is a really outstanding movie. So again, DC, use this. Change your mind. Somebody tell them in the studios at Warner Brothers, use this movie in your DCEU if you have to reboot everything, whatever, with the new Batman coming. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And as usual, thank you for all the support, especially you guys on Patreon. And a huge shout out to my executive Patreon SmokeScreen producers. And if you dig what I do here, please give these videos a like, comment, and share. And of course, be sure to subscribe to get everything and click that notification bell so you're notified when I drop a new video. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.